Did you know that in the 2020 presidential election, 50% of eligible voters aged 18 to 29 cast their ballots? That's right, 50% of voters your age voted. The scary thing is that's a big increase from only 39% in 2016. It's 2024. What can you do to push that number even higher? How can you make sure the issues you care about get the attention they deserve from elected officials? Vote. Let me say it again, vote. The major way to make our concerns heard in a participatory democracy like ours is to vote. Sometimes we find it hard to see the point. There's a common narrative we tend to share about American democracy, that we've had a long, steady march towards universal voting rights and fully representative government. Sure, we might say it took until the 1960s for most Black Americans in the South to vote. Women couldn't vote until 1920. Asian immigrants and Native Americans faced exclusion, and even white men without property were once barred from voting. But we tend to see this as a story of continual progress, ending with everyone having the right to vote today. However, this oversimplification, it's problematic. It can lead to complacency, making us feel like our votes don't really make a difference or that we don't have the power to create real change. But here's the thing, if voting doesn't matter, why are there still people in 2024 trying to make it harder to vote by limiting early voting or complicating mail-in ballots? The fact that these efforts exist should tell us that our votes do matter. And if we think that the struggle for voting rights is over and happened a long, long time ago, we might not see the urgency in exercising our right to vote. To truly understand the importance of your vote, we need a more nuanced history of voting to see how democracy has never been a story of continual progress. In fact, the real history of voting in the US has always been one of, quote, expansions and contractions, of inclusion and exclusion. Remember those four words, expansion, contraction, inclusion, exclusion. Let's break this down by checking out four key moments in US voting history. We'll start with the founding era. Contrary to what you might think, the Constitution did not originally establish a right to vote. That's right, the Founding Fathers didn't include a right to vote in the Constitution. They also left most voting rules up to the individual states, creating what one political scientist calls a, quote, highly fragmented system. Initially, the American system of voting mostly kept voting limited to property-owning white men. Over the first few decades of the life of the new country, we see our first example of expansion and contraction. Expansion. Many states dropped the property requirements for white men. Contraction. New exclusions appear, like barring people who have guardians, paupers, or temporary residents like sailors, soldiers, and students from voting. It would take until the mid-19th century and the end of the Civil War for new significant changes in voting rights. Expansion. The 14th and 15th Amendments introduced the concept of a right to vote into the Constitution and extend voting rights to Black men. Exclusion. All women were explicitly excluded from these new voting rights. This expansion of the vote to Black men led to increased political participation by African Americans, with many elected to local, state, and federal offices. Black voters in the South used the power of their votes to bring about major changes in some places, like creating the first public school systems. However, this expansion of voting faced a backlash, where some Americans sought to contract the newly expanded right to vote. This is when we see the Ku Klux Klan appear, using violence and terror to suppress the Black vote. Southern states making it almost impossible for Black men to vote by complicating registration rules, charging poll taxes, giving literacy tests, and applying the grandfather clause, where only the men whose grandfathers could vote. One way to keep men whose grandfathers had been enslaved from voting. We wouldn't see the next expansion of the vote until the early 20th century, after decades of activism. In 1920, the 19th Amendment finally prohibited voting discrimination based on sex. But you know that tremendous change only came about after more than 60 years of struggle by women. Sadly, this expansion did not have a uniform impact on all American women. Expansion primarily benefited white women, but continued exclusion. Many African American women, especially in the South, still couldn't vote because of the measures that already limited black men's votes. More than another 40 years would go by before yet another voting transformation took place. Years of hard work by thousands of individuals and organizations in the civil rights movement finally pushed Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965, establishing federal oversight to combat voter suppression and opening the vote in the South to black voters. Many of these civil rights activists were young people like you, concerned about the future and the issues they cared about. They knew they needed access to the vote to make change. And only a few years later, the 26th Amendment in 1971 lowered the voting age to all citizens aged 18 and up. Once you learn about the history of expansion and contraction in voting rights, you're likely not surprised to learn that in the aftermath of making sure African Americans had full access to the ballot and young people could vote, we've recently seen renewed efforts to contract the vote. In 2013, for example, the Supreme Court weakened key parts of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, leading to new voter suppression tactics in various states. 10 years later, here in Ohio, the state legislature passed House Bill 458 in 2023. HB 458 sets a more stringent identification requirement where you must show an Ohio state-issued photo ID, a U.S. or state military ID, or your passport to vote in person. HB 458 also provides that each Ohio county can only have one mail-in ballot drop box location, no matter whether it's a big county or a small county. Both parts of HB 458 make it harder, not easier to vote. Exclusion, not inclusion. Now that we're up to the present, let's stop and ask, why should this history of access to the vote matter to you? I think knowing about this history of voting matters especially for young people. Why? 3 reasons. First, progress is never guaranteed. Throughout American history, voting rights have expanded and contracted. They can still contract if we sit back and let it happen. Second, expansions and positive changes in voting rights often follow periods of struggle for change. And third, change happens because individuals, people like you, engage in action to demand their rights. Once we know that the history of voting isn't a story of continual progress, we can see that there's room for each one of us to do something, to act. Which leads me to some final thoughts on what all of this means for us right now. I know it's not an easy time to be young in America. My own daughter is a college student, and she and her friends are really worried about their own futures, the future of our country. And I'll end here with what I've told her. Don't forget, your vote is powerful. It's the result of centuries of struggle by people like you. It's a vital tool for shaping the world you want to live in. Let's show up at the polls. Let's help make sure everyone can access this fundamental democratic right now and in the future. Your future is in your hands at the polling booth or on your mail-in ballot. Make your vote count. Awesome. Oh, thank you. You all just want to rush out and vote now, I know. Go, go.